You're fucked.
Resident Evil 7 blew my mind. And here's how. So, the reviews are all out on Resident Evil 7 to much critical acclaim. Everyone and their mothers mothers have reviewed this game. I think even a dog reviewed this game. There's a hell of a lot of nitpicking from non-critic critics on various websites and likely on this video, but that's to be expected and for various reasons. AAA games with a lot of hype such as this one always tends to get high scores from journalists. You know, the real critics, and it's really hard to separate what opinions are either legitimate, walking on eggshells as to not offend anyone, or if money or potential assets were somehow involved. By potential assets, I mean that there are those who want to stay on the good side of developers, so they keep getting free shit and review codes. Because, unfortunately, some developers do blacklist reviewers who don't always give favorable reviews. In a nutshell, gaming journalism can't always be trusted. That's why the real, honest, and substantial opinions come from people like maybe you or me, independent self-thinkers who says how it is regardless of what anyone else thinks. What I mean by substantial opinions is that it all depends on their ability to analytically break down the pros and cons, how elements work or don't work. Experience with the subject matter definitely counts, and experience with the games in general. Resident Evil, when it was focused more on the horror, was my thing, yo! How I feel about this game may not be how you feel about this game, obviously, but I think it's a goddamn masterpiece, and I'm here to explain just how it blew my mind. How about that? Open-minded, analytical, and straight from a Resident Evil fan. What more can you ask for?
I don't do spoilers.
Sorry, Lucas. There will be spoilers. I suggest you all go out, get this game, play it before watching, because I couldn't recommend it more highly. Resident Evil 7 is a legitimate survival horror game that teams with brilliance, not only as a game in this particular genre, but from a storytelling standpoint as well. And we have Koshi Nakanishi for his excellent game direction, Masachika Kawata for his overall experience with the series and being overseer of the project, and Richard Piercy for his masterful writing, among many others involved in the creation, to thank for that. I don't think there are enough adjectives to even describe how masterfully this game was crafted. The game has formulas and the themes and design that not only harken back to classic Resident Evil days, but homage many of my favorite horror movies. There are even influences from other first-person video games as well, but the pacing of the diverse abundance of inspirations and elements that were homaged were done with finesse, much like the classic Silent Hill games. And it's incredibly impressive how they managed to piece together almost every single subgenre of horror in the first-person perspective without it being too oversaturated, blatant, or try-hard. And of course, this may differ from person to person, but I felt this game was so frightening. I found myself biting my tongue, tense with anxiety, and I don't have nightmares normally, but I even had a nightmare from this game. In essence, even with the lack of VR, which actually sent people to the ER, I felt like I was living through an incredible horror experience. The use of swears in the pursuit of the Bakers is completely unnerving, and it's maybe even more so to individuals who had unfortunately had traumatic verbal and possibly physical abuse, much like this in their youth. This can trigger some players psychologically, and even cause anxiety and panic like they've likely never experienced from any other game. From the very beginning to the end, Resident Evil 7 somehow manages to keep the experience fresh. At no point did I feel the game was getting too repetitive or stale, unlike other games it borrows so heavily from, such as Outlast or Alien Isolation. And despite the change in perspective from third person to first person and the lack of zombies or variety in foes, the game not only feels like a classic Resident Evil, it has all the mechanics in puzzles, levels, items, etc., and nostalgic moments you'd expect from a Resident Evil game. Much like what Doom did for Doom, Resident Evil 7 did for Resident Evil. This is the Resident Evil I've been waiting for 14 years! I'm glad they finally went back to the roots this time. Rather than saying they are going back to the roots and not at all going back to the roots, as in the case with Dead Rising 4.
This is the 10th anniversary of Dead Rising, so we're going back to our roots.
Not that again!
And we still maintain what was really core to Dead Rising.
You liar!
I think fans are gonna love it.
I have to say, going back to a different perspective of horror foremost was a fine choice, and it resulted in a game with an absurd amount of detail and polish, an intricately crafted story with layers, varied and appropriately suited amazing orchestral compositions, unnerving sound design, well-acted, believable and likable new characters, excellent facial animations, motion capture, and lip syncing most of the time.
I don't need you anymore.
If they decide to lip sync. A perfect progression through immersive and well-designed environments, a flawless mixture of tension and moments of respite. And most subtly, for the first time ever, we see our player character Ethan develop from a frightened Joe to a hardened badass that goes from wimpy to snippy despite his very few lines of dialogue. And this is all done eloquently through the game's progression. People wanted Ethan to be more developed as a character, but I think those people wanted a different game. If they spent too much time on Ethan and had him talk to himself all the time, I wouldn't feel as immersed, like I was the player character. I feel his infrequent reactions are appropriate to each and every situation and reflect most players' thoughts at each given time. In some situations, his reaction can be a bit suspicious.
What the fuck? Well, that's special.
But you may have noticed throughout the game, Ethan is pretty monotone, and that's not without reason. If Ethan had a standout personality, then it wouldn't feel like you are the player character. Ethan's personality is one that you can easily project yourself onto. I would suggest that this problem, if you want to call it a problem, could have been corrected if it incorporated a journal detailing his thoughts, or if they allowed you to check the environment more often. Ew, those socks are gross. Just moments before examining those socks, he got his arm chopped off, then is being force-fed human intestines, but somehow, ew, socks. I do feel like there should be more examination of the environments so that the few insignificant times don't seem more significant than they really are. But at the same time, more characterization wouldn't have made Ethan as mysterious and insignificant to the plot as he really is. Overall, I feel like I'm significant. I'm Ethan, and Mia is my girlfriend.
It's me.
And this is my house.
Welcome to the family, son.
Okay, yeah, I deserved that. And that's what I feel like they were going for, and it worked. Before I go on about who's the hottest, Mia or Zoe, I should probably set up the story of the game. The premise is that after 3 years, Ethan receives a message from his presumed dead wife and goes to the town of Dulvey, Louisiana, to find her. No, I'm totally serious. It starts exactly like Silent Hill 2.
I miss you so much. I'm sending tons of kisses. Bye, baby.
I got a letter. The name on the
email
said
Mia.
My wife's name. It's ridiculous. Couldn't possibly be true.
She
died 3 years ago.
This is the place.
Even the short walk to the house has the same context and feelings of the walk to Silent Hill, like you're getting further and further away, more and more isolated. You even get there with a picture and letter from her. Coincidence or not, it's pretty uncanny. Then, once you get to the house, you'll arrive to some familiar territory. For those of you who played the demo, of course. The game director, Nakanishi, gave many expectant players the impression the demo was going to be completely separate from the main game. But as it turns out, not really. The same portion of the house is explorable, just with a few minute changes, and even includes the derelict house tape. On the same subject, some people may have been let down by Resident Evil 7 due to the teaser demo not entirely being a good representation of the final product, despite what Nakanishi stated. I personally don't know why, but many people enjoyed the short and rather uneventful teaser upon release. I didn't. Those people especially loved the final update, including new areas, and the fairly obscure poem puzzle that makes you point at stuff with the dummy finger. Hey, they gave it a use! In order to unlock a secret dirty coin. At first, I thought it was a cool riddle, you know, like that felt like a Silent Hill riddle. I thought it'd make sense to solve, just follow the instructions in the notebook, right? Wrong. But for half of the steps to get the secret ending, you just gotta screw around until you hear a giggle to tell you did something right. I wasn't impressed. In fact, I could nitpick the heck out of it, but I won't. At least PT gave you hints, albeit extremely obscure hints in reverse and stuff. People thought the game was going to be more like this, with cerebral puzzles, and that would have fit perfectly with Mind Game Lucas behind most of them. And I know some of you may disagree, and there's no proof on this, but I think the dummy finger was originally, before the updates, an asset, just an asset from the main game, put there to throw you off, and as it turns out, it is an asshat. Like you. We later come to find out exactly why the finger is singed too. I bet when you opened the drawer in the hallway, you thought it was going to be in there. Who's the dummy now? Okay, I thought so too, but I don't know this for sure, but I honestly don't think the updates to the demo were planned until they realized the entire internet was going crazy, looking for secrets. Going back now to the wild novelizations of theories on Reddit that were packed full of observations and justifications for the glitches, like they had meaning. Looked extremely silly then, but even more so now. Morse code. In the lamp, Morse code. People were seriously reading into this demo just a little too much, when it really was just what it was on the surface, at least prior to the patch, of which, as I said, was most likely developed purely to satiate the fans' desires for what they expected the demo to be in the first place. PT. If you were expecting anything like PT, you probably weren't expecting this.
Holy shit.
Wait. What? We're doing parts now? Get that off my screen. Okay, that's better. Now I need some gameplay footage. Just anything. Yeah, that'll do. Resident Evil 7 has every telling sign of a soft reboot. It's Resident Evil at its soul, but also exists within the same universe, and a familiar character makes a return. Maybe? Really, I don't even know. I think it is Chris. Kinda looks like him from the earlier days, I guess? This guy has gone through more transformations than Lady Gaga. Seriously. There are also 2 memos alluding to characters from previous games. I guess the guy who built the mansion in the first game was contracted by Lucas to build some of the puzzles, and the reporter from Outbreak is still reporting. These little nods are nice, but nothing significant to dwell on. Really, don't dwell on it. Reboots in video games haven't turned out all too well as of lately, as in the case with Tomb Raider, Thief, Mirror's Edge, and DMC. Though, there were also some good ones, such as Doom and, Doom, but these were all just reboots, retelling of a story in an almost completely different light. A soft reboot generally works a lot better, so it doesn't necessarily spell disaster. This isn't a soft disaster. A soft disaster is what I call the night after eating too many jalapenos on my pizza. I also sometimes call that the Ring of Fire.
And it burns, 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 the Ring of Fire.
It's not a soft reboot in the same fashion as, say, maybe The Force Awakens, as it doesn't retell the same story note for note, but it does bring back a lot of familiar elements from the original Resident Evil. As a wise man once said,
again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
In this case, they bring back a lot of mechanics that gel with the original game that came out in 1996, and plotted out the game with that familiar formula in mind. Examples include the green herbs, survival knife, locked doors and keys sharing similarities and themes, save rooms, complete with safety music and an item chest, and on Madhouse difficulty, using tapes to save. There are maps, a clock puzzle, a shotgun puzzle, a painting puzzle, examining items for hidden items like lockpicks, or like the book containing a key item, combining items, inventory management, backpacks to upgrade your inventory space, a blurry and poorly textured keypad that homages the sound effects from classic Resident Evil games, foes bursting through windows, mutated bosses, and it just doesn't stop there!
No!
Even the flow of the game's level progression definitely hits the same notes as the original games. You leave the mansion and progress from there to other places. There's also small portions of parallels in the story, but outside the soft reboot elements, there's a hefty amount of fresh new material, so it's not just heavily leaning on its legacy. And that I can not only appreciate, but was essential to creating this new and original gaming masterpiece. It all can be attributed to the fresh new first-person perspective and a very engaging, perfectly written story that's not as much as an aside as you'd expect. It's a story that far surpassed my expectations. It has many diverse layers and well-written, likable characters with depth and personality.
I know. Fucking password, right?
You even come to love a few of the bosses for that very same reason. Towards the end, there's even a scene that is very important and is absolutely necessary for various reasons. I have a lot of reasons. For one, it sort of apologizes to you for the hell it put you through, and it feels real nice. 2, it humanizes Mr. Baker, and it gives you a glimpse of the kind of man he was before the incident. 3, it kind of explains the hive mind of the mutamycete fungus created by Evelyn. 4, it gives you a complete understanding of the events and one important objective to motivate the character for what's to come next. Non-stop action. I know this all could just be a hallucination. It kind of reminds me of the Lisa scene from Silent Hill 1. But this scene even explains that their family souls are somehow trapped within the mutamycete. The original family are all already dead by this point, so the only thing he means by save our family is to put their souls to rest by destroying Evelyn. Besides Lucas, he kind of just takes off and you never hear from him again, which kind of helps set up a potential sequel. We will see him again.
Guess that's not in the cards. Not yet.
Lucky me.
The story, written by Richard Piercy, who, by the way, was responsible for writing the deep psychological story of Spec Ops: The Line, and co-wrote alongside the director, Fear. Oh, and you can see a lot of story elements from VAR. The underlying plot and eventual twist in that game is almost exactly the same in this game. So much so it's uncanny in Fear. You go in with the pretense that the real bad guy is Paxton, as with Baker, when you soon come to realize they are all under the control of Alma, such as with Evelyn. Alma was part of experiments that led her to be telepathic, like Evelyn. Also like Evelyn, Alma can cause certain individuals to hallucinate her. The twist in Fear is that you learn Alma has died and her consciousness was transferred into Paxton through telepathic means. Whereas the twist in this game is when you come to learn the side effect of the E-Series virus is rapid aging, when it was supposed to stop at around 10 years of age, and that Evelyn is really the catatonic old lady all along. That genius twist, which is hinted at the very beginning, hasn't been done so flawlessly in a game, well, at least since Silent Hill 2. So, slightly different payoff between games, but still pretty heavy. While Fear was a Western take on a Japanese horror, Resident Evil 7 is a Western take on a Japanese take on a Western horror. This is the first American to write a Resident Evil game, and there were other American localizers to boot, and it really shows in how accurate and believable the dialogue for the Bakers are. And the story can be very cerebral, which is a staple of Mr. Piercy's writing habits. There are so many awesome parallels that shine of perfect authoring. It's so ingeniously written that, on a fresh playthrough, you just brush off most of the Baker's dialogue as psychopathic nonsense. Then, when on a second playthrough, their dialogue makes complete sense. Don't get me wrong, they are completely out of it from the virus seeping into their brains, but they are constantly talking to someone or about someone.
I was gonna be your father. Now she says he will be her father.
I can hear her. I can feel her clawing her way back inside of me. Get out!
She loves you. She wants us to be a family, goddammit.
We're gonna be a family now that you're here.
You All you have to do is accept her fucking gift!
I'm just trying to show him not everybody wants to go back to how things were.
Remember the first Saw movie or The Sixth Sense? The twists in those films were pretty damn awesome the first time you saw them. Then after rewatching, it was like watching whole new movies because they were in a new light. You had knowledge you didn't know before your initial viewings. That's the exact same context here. When you know everyone is seeing and is being controlled by an unseen child entity and are just responding to her, it's almost like playing a whole new game. More so if you take on Madhouse difficulty your second playthrough. Speaking of Saw, there's a small section that was inspired by it. These Saw homages are much more prevalent in the DLC.
So you two are gonna play a little game.
I want to play a game.
My family needs me!
No, gotta go home to my family.
But also in the main game with the barn section and the puzzle on the VHS tape. Oh, of which is Clancy, the cameraman from the first videotape, by the way. If I had to guess, L by his name in this memo means Lucas, as he was taken for many of his sadistic experiments. Poor Clancy. Burning alive would certainly suck. And he does sound very, very convincing. So much so, it's extremely hard to sit through. On the other hand, when you burn to death as Ethan... Oh no, I'm on fire. Ow, get it off me. And on easy and normal difficulties, the password to the keypad barring entrance to this room is 1408. A Stephen King homage? Coincidence? There are even exact mannerisms and lines taken from horror movies such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Evil Dead. The game homages a lot of material, but also covers many, many different genres of horror. So if one thing doesn't freak you out, another thing might. Implementing a variety of horrifying elements is a perfect way to design a horror game. As such, the scariest parts of the game between each person vary dramatically, and that's for good reason. Some people are freaked by something as lame as bugs. Others are freaked by dismemberment and gore. There's a lot covered as far as horror genres and subgenres are concerned, and I'll use this graph made by Horror on Screen to demonstrate it for you. Here we go! Gore and disturbing horror, with elements of torture, both movies in this box being an inspiration. I guess maybe splatter? If the demo is any indicator, you can add cannibal to the mix, because the food, it's people.
Victims were apparently eaten.
They're eating her!
Eat it. It's food.
And then they're going to eat me! Oh my God!
Psychological horror with an obvious overall feeling of phobia and isolation, and madness and paranoia. Killer horror with definite slasher influences, the most notable inspirations being both movies mentioned here. And I think it's pretty obvious backwoods and redneck, and both movies being heavy inspirations. Texas Chainsaw is a given. The first thing I thought of when I saw the catatonic old lady was of the catatonic old man from that film. The dysfunctional dinner scene is an obvious reference, shot from almost the same angle. Monster horror is certainly a focus, but unfortunately this time around, zombies aren't a part of the picture, but there is an infection, so virus is included. Hey, look at that! Resident Evil is on the list. These other ones are a bit outlandish, and frankly, it'd be a little weird if these were included, so I'll just cross them right off. Neo-monsters is really the only relevant subgenre, with the movie Feast being a good example. Just look at that cover. Does that monster look familiar? How about now? Maybe animals in nature, though not as much as I would have liked. And why not? Let's skip ahead to body horror over there in the corner, because, well, there's a persistent amount of that. Strangely enough, there's even a pretty hefty dose of paranormal in the mix with ghosts and spirits, mainly in the teaser demo. Haunted house-like elements, possession, for sure, but its major influence is really from this category. Devil, demon, hell, with the Evil Dead. Hell, the whole first part of the game takes from the Evil Dead. Take a look at Mia, who shares the same name as Ash's girlfriend and has very similar back and forth transformations of possession. In the second Evil Dead, you even got this crazy similarity to the virus spreading in the demo.
Groovy.
And Ash even uses a chainsaw to chop his own hand off, for crying out loud. Then you got Supernatural, with some similarities to themes within both movies mentioned. And last, but certainly not least, yet least expected, is Creepy Kid down there. That's all genres and 17 and a half subgenres covered in this game alone. That's a lot of genres. While Resident Evil was always strongly influenced by both George Romero's movies and The Evil Dead always took the backseat, and now they flipped the coin.
Call it.
The Evil Dead is now in the front seat with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the wheel. But George Romero isn't completely drowned out by the roaring of their chainsaws. He also made The Crazies, which takes a step out of nowhere and rips the top off the car. Kinda off topic, but have you seen Jack's mad drifting skills? The Crazies also features a virus spreading that turns people into killer psychopaths, and it even features an Umbrella Corps-like cleanup team. The infection seems to turn people black and veiny, just like in the game. The horror presented is not just limited to movies. Nakanishi admitted he played PT and thought it was excellent, but he also noted that the direction PT was moving in was in a completely different content direction they were moving in, which is exactly right. But of course, this didn't stop them from hiring one of the designers of PT, Jordan Amaro, who probably didn't take too long adjusting to his new work environment. Nakanishi also stated he played every first-person horror game out there, and Outlast was the one that really stood out to him. Because of that, you do see a lot of similarities in gameplay to other indie horror games, but it's more like a mashup. While it does borrow a lot of gameplay elements from Outlast, it's only like Outlast in very small chunks with the pursuit of the bakers. Then with the makeshift flamethrower, it feels more like Alien, Isolation. Then towards the finale, starts to feel more actiony, like Doom. It has such a perfect progression. You go from no weapons, just an average Joe, feeling tense and helpless, trying to make sense of everything at the beginning, and by the end, you're more than an average Joe. You've got upgrades, heavy weapons, and you cruise through, blasting heads right off. But don't get me wrong, it never once loses that feeling of tension and horror. And that progression to the end is your final payoff for all the punishment you take at the beginning, but also for taking the time to explore and find the hidden upgrades and powerful weapons. I know there may be a lot of stuff that you already know because you've already played the game, assumingly, but I'm gonna go ahead and talk about them anyway. The gameplay is much like what you would expect from a classic Resident Evil game, with inventory management and scarce ammo and healing items. There's even a simple and clever combination system much like Resident Evil 3. Instead of red herbs, you got yellow and red packets to mix with combinable items. Green herbs alone don't really heal too much, so you have to create health vials of liquid, which by the way, has the most satisfying animation and makes complete sense. You pour it on your wounds. Simple enough, right? Makes more sense than popping Tic Tacs or spraying it in your face. This time around, there aren't blue herbs because you don't need them. Backpacks to expand your inventory space are still a part of the equation this time around. Even though you have much more inventory space than the classics to begin with, it works well considering the amount of weapons and combinable items you find as you progress. The inventory UI is all in real time and it's very well designed. What I love the most is the fact that you can check your health via the wrist thing you're wearing. It's much like the classic Resident Evils in that it goes from danger, red, to caution, yellow, to fine with blood spatters on the screen, to just fine. Basically what the blood spats indicate is that you're not at 100% health, and simply consuming a green herb will remove them. A little nitpick of mine is that if my health indicator shows that I'm fine, there should not be blood spatter on my screen. What was wrong with the orange caution? That would have solved this mystery. Other than that, blood spatter on the screen is a great way to display the health status in the first person without using a HUD. Resident Evil games, because they were in third person, had integrated your condition into the animations of your character. They still have that, but this is an extra layer on top, so it's pretty much all the same idea. It's apparent they were going for a fully immersive experience with a minimal HUD, like ammo count disappears from the screen when you're not using it, and blood spatter, as well as checking your wristwatch, doesn't tear you out of the immersion as much as a health bar would. Also, when taking massive critical near-death damage and waiting it out, you regenerate health, and can take a few more hits before dying. The only gripe I have, and it could have been a whole lot worse, is this stupid objective indicator in the top left. It's not a huge deal for me because I never read it. Seriously, there's no need for this, and it's pretty clear what you need to do to progress. And with the scale of this game versus past games, it seems even less necessary. When you play through as Flashback Mia, she constantly holds that wrist device Ethan uses up to make you watch the distance between you and Evelyn, and it gets pretty old fast. Present day Mia doesn't have a wrist device, so you cannot even check your health status. These are all just little gripes really. I really love the old and new elements, but some of them seem inconsistent or plain unnecessary. And I have to say, the map in this game is by far the best map in a Resident Evil game. You can literally see everything. Of course, you have to gain the maps first. Either that or chart the areas yourself and it draws it out for you. But what's so incredible about it is how easy it is to use and find where you need to go. It clearly points out doors locked and what keys you need to unlock them. It shows you where you can save. It even shows you where boxes requiring lockpicks are, assuming you found them. You can quickly access memos from the screen as well and find out what you've read or not read chronologically. I should also mention a few other great and not so great mechanics. The blocking system works incredibly well, possibly too well. I didn't use it a whole lot my first time, but it was really my second go around I realized that I should have been using it all along. It's a really great mechanic. A combination of crouching and blocking when appropriate can definitely put you in the advantage. Another feature is a quick turn that I nor anyone else in the world will ever have any reason to use. But it's a good thing it's there. I also do wish, and this is kind of like a big thing, I wish there was a way to peek around corners, like in Outlast. Or maybe even zoom in, like in PT. Though I guess zooming in wouldn't be too realistic unless you had robot eyes.
What's with the gray goo? Bite my tiny metal ass!
You get weapon upgrades as you progress. Handgun, shotgun, burner, which is a makeshift flamethrower that you'll use for a few minutes and for a boss fight and throw it into your box. Grenade launcher, which is so pathetically weak when compared to the shotgun, you'll just throw it into your box. Then you'll get a broken shotgun and handgun that you can combine with repair kits and fix them. They are basically more powerful versions of the weapons you already have, so you'll throw the old ones you had into your box, unless you're stingy with ammo and wait until ammo is depleted from the weapon before throwing it into your box. You even get body upgrades through stabilizers and steroids injected via syringe. I wonder if he comes out of this looking a lot like Chris Redfield did in Resident Evil 5. The steroids make you tougher, so you can take much more damage, and the stabilizers are much more valuable than you may think, by increasing your reload speed. Stronger guns tend to have lower ammo capacity, so this does help greatly. I should also mention, by the time you play as Mia in her flashback, she already has all the skills and upgrades indicating that she's been professionally trained. But this also starts to set into motion the more action-oriented events of the game. Throughout the game, you come across these antique coins, and you'll eventually find bird cages in various areas of the game with unlockables, and one even contains the Magnum, a staple of Resident Evil, and the aforementioned injections. You simply drop the required amount of hazel nickels into the toy capsule machine to unlock them. On Madhouse difficulty, there's 3 additional cages in the main hall, 2 of which contain coins to increase defense and attack power, but they cannot be carried over to New Game Plus. Speaking of which, no matter what you do, you start a new game on New Game Plus, with everything you unlocked. It makes it ridiculously hard to avoid using these items. This is more so a problem when you go to play on Madhouse difficulty. You should not be able to use the ridiculously overpowered weapons and items on Madhouse difficulty until after you've completed it. Not only that, but Madhouse difficulty is unlocked instantly as pre-order DLC or is unlocked after beating the game. Madhouse difficulty mixes things up a bit by changing up item placements and throws you for a loop, so it makes a great second playthrough. But as a person who likes to play every horror game on the hardest difficulty, Madhouse is much too difficult, and normal is much too easy outside the boss fights. A difficulty between normal and Madhouse, like a, I don't know, hard difficulty? Here, forget the Ethan Must Die DLC for a moment. Why don't we break the mold, pardon the pun, for once, and have 4 difficulty options? Hard difficulty could have been implemented saving via cassette tapes with a hefty amount of challenge, but with the same item placement from the easy and normal difficulties. Usually autosaves kill detention, but not so much with this game. The Resident Evil series creator Shinji Mikami defended manual saving as it's part of the tension. Even he tried to push that in his game with The Evil Within, which is basically a fresh new take on Resident Evil.
Sign in here. Without signing in, there is no way to ensure your future memories.
You don't see Resident Evil 7 doing that.
Ethan, use the tape recorder on the table to record your thoughts. It may come in handy someday.
Granted, manual saving isn't gone, but using tapes for limited saves should have been a mandatory thing, so you really gotta plan your saves instead of saving every chance you get. Regardless, limited saves forcing you to methodically plan when and where to save wouldn't hurt, and no one would complain, except for maybe Polygon. As for the unlockables, there are a lot. I could go on and on about these unlockables, but that would be boring. I actually wrote a whole section on it, and yeah, I just cut it. So I'll just get to my final point. It really screws up that perfect progression and flow that really makes the game. For instance, the circular saw grinds any enemy and boss into putty within seconds. Just keep walking with the saw out and anything in your path, including bosses, will get stun locked into annihilation. Just buzzsaw Marge and her massive vagina and be done with it. It's so overpowered. This problem could be corrected if they allowed you to start a brand new game. On a positive note, the amount of polish and detail in the environments allow for extreme immersion. There's just so much to look at and admire about the level design. I've heard people telling me the textures aren't that great when viewing them close up, and I have once experienced a time everything appeared blurry before the higher resolution textures kicked in. But I played this on the PC, and I never had a problem with graphics. I guess the doors and, well, the keypad I mentioned earlier are common texture atrocities. Either way, that can be forgiven when you take a step back and look at the big picture to really admire the minor details and stunning realism, thanks to the RE Engine's fantastic use of lighting. Much like PT, there's an absurd amount of detail in the messy mansion that compels you to examine every nook and cranny, which is good, because you're rewarded for that, not only in useful items, but story, through memos and inference through the family's pictures, possessions, and other various details. Now I can't say it looks as good as PT, of course it doesn't. I mean, PT only had to render one hallway, so even the sound design has so much effort put into it. You can hear the whooshing of wind from draft holes, the fluttering of window curtains, running electrical equipment, clocks ticking, unidentifiable creepy sounds, rain and thunder, you name it. And I swear to Chris, you even hear the different weapon parts clattering when you walk or run, depending on what weapon you have equipped. The sounds even change depending on the acoustics of the area you're in. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but the game has a whopping 81 tracks of amazing orchestral compositions so well integrated into the game. You barely even notice the music is even there in the background. If you turn the music off, you'll definitely notice. What it is that you are so immersed in every moment thanks to this unnerving music that it feels very organic. The only time you may really even notice the music is when you enter a save room and it fills you with the sense of safety, nostalgia, and it works very well. The music throughout, and I even noticed this in the teaser demo, feels like Resident Evil music. The music of these games were never designed to sit down and relax to. They were always meant to cross chords and be unsettling in order to keep you in the moment. And the lead composers, Akiyuki Morimoto and Satoshi Hori, understand that, but there are at least 6 total composers, 7 if you count the outsourced main theme, but the 2 mentioned actually work for Capcom. Now, here's where I really want to get into the minor flaws of the game and some complaints I hear about the game. Though the game is brilliant indeed, you have to admit there are some issues. If you went into the game expecting brain-racking Silent Hill puzzles akin to PT, you would have been let down, severely. The puzzles in this game, even though they feel kinda like classic Resident Evil puzzles, only with a lot less effort, are outright awful. There's one really good one in a videotape, but that's about it. The rest consist of multiple instances of casting shadows with objects and examining items, including memos. There's one puzzle that included paintings on the wall that I didn't even know was a puzzle until I solved it. It was that bad. Okay, so here's what happened. I interacted with a painting thinking it'd drop and an item would be behind it. Found more paintings, spun them around, not sure what I was doing exactly, and randomly I heard a locker open behind me. That's when I really took a look around the room and realized I've just solved the puzzle without even trying. Okay, Resident Evil puzzles were never on the same level as Silent Hill puzzles, but that would have been a nice change. I want puzzles that get me thinking, but do have a certain theme and blend well. And like I said, with Lucas being behind all the puzzles and with his tendency to play mind games, it wouldn't have been out of place. Though the focus of this game isn't about the puzzles nearly as much as any classic Resident Evil, so that's totally fine and can be forgiven. Some complain about the length of the game, which I think is silly. The game took me 14 hours to complete. And yeah, I know, that's a bit excessive, especially considering on average, most people beat the game in 8 to 10 hours. I guess I spent a lot of time really analyzing the environments and looking for items. I don't know exactly what I was doing, maybe I was jerking off, but I was actually surprised the game continued long after the third mutation boss fight of Jack. I was so sure it was over the second we took off in the boat. Then the onset realization that there's still so much mystery to unravel. Playing as Mia made me giddy. I was very happy for that. Resident Evil games have always left the initial area and led to unsuspecting places, especially secret laboratories complete with security alarms. And this is no different. It was pretty surprising for me that it all led back to the Baker's residence, complete with flashbacks from the beginning of the game, explaining Mia's actions. It was a pretty genius loop. Overall, I was very happy with the length of the game. I also felt there weren't enough use for the 3 main keys you collect. Half the doors they unlock are optional, and when you no longer have any use for them, there's no option to discard, like in the previous classics. On the same topic, there weren't enough locked doors akin to the classics, which, like inventory management, was a puzzle in itself. Somehow the mansion from the first game felt larger than the entirety of this game, but that's likely due to the backtracking, which, for some reason, is so frowned down upon in video games now.
He needs serum.
Hold on. I'll be back. Hope this is what you wanted.
Everything has to be linear and straightforward nowadays. God forbid you get lost. Then you might have to go through the grueling process of exploring a location of unknown terrors and getting unlost. Good thing there's this objective indicator. What I would do without it. Some people complained about the non-boss final boss fight. I don't feel like it was supposed to be some crazy challenging final boss anyway. It never was in classic Resident Evil games. The usual formula is you shoot the bad guy boss a few times, get hit a few times, then get a weapon so powerful it takes it out in a few hits. Done. The constant movement and motion and overall experience of the boss fight had me on the edge of my seat regardless, and felt rewarding enough. It even opened up new mysteries by the time
Redfield
arrived to escort you away via helicopter. I half expected the mansion to explode. A flyby bombing would have been nice, but I guess that would distract from the surprise Mia and awkward small talk.
Mia. You made it. I'm glad.
Hey, that never stopped Chris and Jill. Hey, why'd you stop her? She was reaching for ya dingus, ya dingus. No, what's that? Oh, stop acting like a badass. The enemies in this game are much too manipulable. In the third game, you were never safe. Nemesis, and hell, even zombies would chase you through doors to a dead end, and you're done. Well, I am being dramatic. You could dodge attacks, but there was always a constant threat. Save rooms were always generally safe, but nowadays that mechanic doesn't necessarily fly. Maybe if the door slammed shut and a deadbolt locked from the inside, it would make more sense. In Resident Evil 7, the save rooms are one big way to manipulate the Bakers. Walk into a save room when one is chasing you, and they'll grunt like sour apples and disappear. just to respawn somewhere completely opposite of where they were originally. There are many other ways to manipulate enemies in this game. You may also use the shotgun room. Grab the shotgun to close the door and Mr. Baker will disappear immediately. You can use the light puzzles to get Mr. Baker or any enemies around you to disappear. You can load up a VHS tape, wait a bit, then end it, and Mr. Baker will not show up again for the rest of your entire time in the mansion. What is that really? The so-called molded are very non-threatening, considering doors are their biggest enemy. Close doors on them, they'll wait for a little while, then melt into a puddle. I learned this trick from the teaser demo. The way the molder disappears in the teaser is much like what happens when you walk into a save room or an area they cannot enter. The game tries to explain this away in the loading screens by mentioning something about dissolving when exposed to a lot of light, but they're just trying to excuse the way they developed these monsters and where they mapped them to be able to go. I've seen them in the light numerous times, and there's no memo in the game explaining why these creatures would suddenly weaken and puddle when it comes to light. I noticed a lot of people who didn't play the demo didn't know about the door trick, though I figure the people who have played the demo to some extent know about the door trick. Besides, there's an extreme lack in variety and quantity of the molded, but this one can actually be explained away in the story. But not so much so it doesn't allow room for more variations. Here, let me explain. Besides the Bakers, which technically count as bosses, like the tyrants from the past, there are 3 main monsters. You have the regular molded, the crawlin molded, and the boomer molded, which are all basically the same humanoid creatures. Of course, there are variations of the molded, such as the one with a blade on its arm. And then of course you got the giant mutated flying insects, which are more like a VR gimmicky annoyance than anything. The story is that Evelyn is molding friends out of people, or the various body parts of people. It seems her insatiable childhood desire to have family and friends is what pushed her over the edge to infect and control people. So why can't there be a dog molded? Dogs are considered family members by a lot of people. But why not alligator molded or bird molded? Evil little girls would love alligators as pets, right? How come we can have giant mutated insects but not giant mutated alligators or spiders? If you're going to have one mutated creature, might as well have more. You've already created your plot hole. Unless insects in Louisiana are really like that, then count me out. I'm not going there. You see what I mean though? It's important in a horror game to change up the enemies more frequently to keep the anticipation of the terror always unknowing. Remember the freaking chimeras? You didn't see those coming, and it created a whole new situation of how you'd go about dealing with them. On the same note, creator of the Resident Evil series, Shinji Mikami, said,
"During the time when we were making it, my personal feeling was that Resident Evil was not a game that should be made into a series. This is because horror tends to have strong patterns that are easy to get used to, meaning they're easy to get tired of."
This is true, and this is why changing up the pattern was necessary for this iteration. But this also holds true to new surprises in enemies. This very quote is also the reason why maybe your first Resident Evil was your scariest one. After that, you may find yourself falling into a groove, knowing exactly how the mechanics should work with healing and simpler things such as taking items off walls or statues usually lead to traps. Safe rooms are safe. Going through doors will reset the enemy placements, sometimes giving you the upper hand. And that suspiciously quiet rooms or hallways won't stay quiet for long. All that said, I love the characters, and every one of them has a certain amount of depth to them, besides the player character, of course. They are all well acted, mo-capped, and have great facial animations.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna take you for a ride.
Feeling like the dysfunctional Baker family could all be real people adds to the horror. It isn't until later you realize these people were presumably a rather normal southern family, but the infection of the mold reaching their brains turned them into complete psychopaths. That is with the exception of Lucas, of course. Going into his room and reading about how he likes to look in the swamp for dead bodies, then reading in his journal, when he was presumably young, about how he liked to lock people in his attic for the fun of it, gives you a good idea of his personality. Even his parents CAT scanning his brain shows they had some concern for his character. Lucas was a serial killer in the making. Many serial killers start out by killing animals, and there are many signs to Lucas doing just that. So you come to understand he is not under the influence of Evelyn, and most likely working with the organization responsible for her.
We did find several encrypted messages from the baker's son Lucas to an unknown third party. You can probably guess who that was. That's just great.
When you realize he isn't the way he is because of Evelyn, like everyone else, but because that's the way he is, it turns the game on its head. This enigmatic organization couldn't have put their trust in a worse person, which is why his loose thread and the very last thing you hear him say leads to a potential future Resident Evil villain, and couldn't have been done better in creating a new story arc.
Unless you have any more surprises up your sleeve, I suggest you...
Now that would be telling, Ethan. And I don't do spoilers.
His character and his character's involvement with this organization that are creating biological weapons is very ambiguous and leads to more questions. Despite Umbrella Corps keeping a close eye on the situation, they couldn't have come at a worse time.
I'm Redfield.
Yeah, where were you 5 hours ago? You might have been able to save this guy's poor life and captured Lucas before he took off to create more evil! Oh, sorry, thanks.
The fuck took you guys so long?
See what I mean? The player character mirrors my thoughts exactly. So, I ask, Mia or Zoe? This decision is one I always have trouble with in games. It's a great moral decision that, regardless of the outcome, feels like it has significant weight, but really doesn't. I knew at this point, whatever decision I made would alter the ending, so I guess it does have some weight that puts it above the level of, say, the Telltale games. Here's a perfect scenario. Mia is the girl you came for, yet you find love in Zoe, and leave with her instead. Sounds fantastic, right? At this point, Mia hasn't necessarily been on your good side. She tried to kill you. It might be beyond saving. You don't know at this point the specific details of why she was possessed, yet you still hold this grudge. Get it? Grudge? Zoe, on the other hand, looks out for you. You and Zoe are working together to get out of the mess the entire time. She's mysterious, like Ada Wong, which makes her more interesting, like the goth girl I had a crush on in high school.
Zoe,
Not now. We don't have the time.
You even get the confirmation you need that, yup, she has breasts. But herein lies the problem. You make the decision to cure and save her, and within minutes you regret that decision because she's killed by the mold. How the mold kills her after you supposedly cure her, I'm not sure, but it sure is convenient. But doesn't the story say that when a person is too far gone from the infection, the serum kills them, then turns them into stone? Zoe never appeared to be anything other than a normal person. When Evelyn kills someone with the mold, they generally die like this guy, but with Zoe, she turns to stone. I can't explain this myself, but I'm sure there is an explanation somewhere out there. So basically the option is to leave with Mia or leave alone after an extremely regretful and tear-jerking last fight against her. Literally a good ending or a bad ending.
Why, Mia? Why?
But the moment you're taken away in the good ending, Ethan couldn't sound more monotone when he says,
You made it. I'm glad.
Whoa now, don't sound too happy. I know they are estranged, not by choice, and Ethan probably moved on with his life to some extent. But you have to remember, she was important enough to go out after, instead of just forwarding her email to the police, so that they can deal with it. He went there with a loving photo of them together. He still has her video on his phone, which he just throws out for dramatic effect in the bad ending. I guess he had an upgrade coming up. And this extremely forced line is his reaction.
You made it. I'm glad.
Oh, like I said though, they chose this delivery on purpose to keep you in his head. Literally, because without you, there is no head. Maybe it's just me, but for this one delivery, he could have sounded a little happier. Oh, and the ending, yes, is very, very cheesy, but it's not unlike other Resident Evil endings. So I'm not gonna get into it. I can go on, and I would. I really would. So I'll just leave you with this, my closing statement. I did not see this coming, and I didn't think I would say this, especially after playing the demo, but Resident Evil 7 is a perfect game. Yeah, I listed a bunch of possible flaws, and that's what I always do.
If you say, it could be worse, you mean it exactly, because things can always be worse. They can always be worse more often than they can always be better.
But perfection cannot truly be achieved without some minor flaws. When it comes to other art forms, some may say the flaws are part of the overall masterpiece, and this is no different to me. The pacing, the story, the sound, the music, the graphics, the gameplay, all of it come together perfectly and prove to us that all along they were capable of making a game like this. But really, it couldn't have come at a better time. Not only did indie horror games need this up in the ante, but we needed a true Resident Evil game that captured the very spirit and essence of the name, Resident Evil. It soft rebooted the series in such a way that everything felt fresh and intense, a far cry from the formula we were so adjusted to, yet still extremely close to its heart. As a big fan of Resident Evil and all things horror, I have to say that this game will definitely go down as one of the finest I've ever played and can sit on my shelf with all the other Resident Evil games without shame. I did brush over a lot of the story, but that's because I do intend intend to explain it soon after this in a shorter and simpler way. For a good sense of the delivery of the progression and how the mixture of all the different components to this game complement each other so perfectly, go take a look at Ragnar's video here. We coincidentally decided to make Resident Evil 7 videos, and both our videos coincidentally focus on different subjects, and I have to say complement each other nicely. I figured since it was so close to Thanksgiving, now would be a great time to give thanks. Thank you, Rag, for your collaboration and not saying everything I wanted to say. Thanks to everyone for watching. I hope I covered most bases here. I'm sorry to keep people waiting so very long on this video. I want to thank all my patrons, as they all helped contribute to this video in some way. A special thanks to Chris, who has supported my channel greatly, not only by financial means, but through moral support. Thanks Nicole Hazel for your donation and becoming a patron. Thanks Henry Perez for increasing your pledge and for all the great times live streaming together. And this very special shout out to the following patrons:
the legendary Chris and GSXP, the heroic Tyler Hunter, the elite Andreas Sineski Birnbaumer, Alex Loop, Jonathan Ryan, Shaw Wifty, and Sigma Undine Goodnight.
Have a nice day.
This was a Fungo Review original, putting it simply and sillily, or better known as analytically and comedically. Please subscribe and share.
Now, if you feel so inclined, why don't you take a look at my other Resident Evil reviews? I even went into the Resident Evil 7 teaser demo, and you could see in that video how my opinions completely flipped off all around like a fish on a deck.